Good evening, folks, and welcome to Soaring Prophets Live with your boys, the Soaring Prophets, and a very cool guest this evening. We've got Glenn the Geek, Glenn Hebert, also known as Glenn the Geek of Horse Radio Network. And for those profiteers out there that know me, you know my family. We're in the horse industry. My father was, a quarter horse man. My uncle, who recently passed away, was a standardbred fella. My cousins are all racing probably as we speak somewhere around Ontario, running into the States. We're horse people. And Glenn, I had the privilege of meeting him when we were down in Orlando, Florida at the Healthcare Amplified Summit. He's one of the speakers. He talked a little bit about his business, getting it started in the podcast community. And now what he's done with the Horse Radio Network is in the process and has sold it off to the Equine Network. Equine Radio Network?
Equine Network, yep.
Equine Network. So many radio networks. And
yeah.
But he also had another story that went along with it, and that kind of leads to what we talk about here at Soaring Prophets is, had a bit of a health scare. So this is a gentleman who started, 18 years ago?
I started in 2006.
Right.
That's when I did my first show. Yeah.
That's a long time ago.
Yeah, none of us knew what we were doing back then. We had no idea what we were doing. And people,
And where does podcasting come from in the horse world? I tell you right now, we play the radio in the barn for the horses, but that's as far as we get.
Yeah, I owned an acting company for 10 years. I've done a lot of things, but I owned an acting company for 10 years. We did Medieval Feasts. We did kind of an improv. We kind of did a Benny Hill improv version of a Medieval Feast. And it was a lot of fun. We had the same cast, 20 of us for 10 years. We did 450 shows. And it was a lot of fun. I played the king, and, we had the whole cast, musicians and jesters and, the whole thing. And that's where I met my wife, actually. But I did that for so long, and then, kind of got out of it. I was in the investment world for a long time. And then we've done a number of businesses, started a number of businesses, sold businesses along the way. And I just needed something that I could entertain again. I wanted to be back in entertainment, and podcasting was just starting. The Equine Network, Leo Laporte was around, and he's the one I knew that was doing podcasts. And I said, I got to do something entertaining, but I didn't want to go on the road again. So that's where I started my first podcast, and I was like, what can I talk about? Well, I'm a horse husband. I married into the horse world. I know a little bit about horses, not a lot. And actually, that was a hard thing. I found I knew who I wanted to be my co-host for the first show, and she was a friend of my wife's, and I knew her too. She was a serious horse person. And I was like, what do I do? How do I play this? Because I'm an expert in nothing in horses. Right. And that's how we played it. We played it. Well, and it was one of the things I've seen so many podcasters start out and they're trying to be something they're not. Yeah. And the audience knows that in 2 minutes, especially, Patrick, you'll know this, in the horse world, they know fakers. I mean, you know in 2 minutes that somebody's a faker, right? So I just played a horse husband. I'm America's horse husband. That was my title since the beginning, which means I don't have to know anything, right? But I ask the questions that people don't know anything ask. And now probably after 6,000 episodes, I know more than most horse people, right? I've interviewed 7,000 people. So I probably know more than most horse people, but they don't expect me to know anything, which is great.
That's so interesting because as everyone out there, all you profiteers out there know, Pat does financial fitness. And when we started financial fitness, I was his number one guest. And the reason that is because we had this theory that it was people like me who knew nothing about finances that would ask the questions that you would want to hear. But then it kind of transitioned in something a little bit more than that. Is that kind of what happened, that it went from an experience that you guys were like talking, you were learning about the business, and then it went to the high level you have now? Because there's more to it than horse husband.
Yeah. I think I'm a pretty good interviewer. That's one of my traits, having been an improv performer for 10 years. And we've done improv classes at PodFest. You guys were at PodFest. We've done improv classes there. I think that everybody that's in any kind of world such as ours, YouTube, podcasting, should take improv classes. I think it's so important. But in the early days, we started with one show, and I knew I wanted to expand it. I started, the first show was called Stable Scoop, and I started the Horse Radio Network at the exact same time. So there was just one show for a year, and then we added another show, and then another show, and then we kept growing. But I've always stayed, I'm always just Glenn the Geek. And I got that name because I was always kind of the first to do things. I never wanted to be second. So we were always kind of the first to experiment with things. And we had the first tack business online. We were one of the first people to sell on eBay. We had a tack business selling, tack is horse supplies. We had one of the first ones where people were still sending us checks. There was no way to pay online. That's how early it was.
Wow.
So that's how I got that name, and it just stuck, and just always wanted to be first. So then now, fast forward, we started adding shows, getting more popular, and I knew I always wanted to have the number one horse podcast network when podcasting became popular. Now, it took a lot longer for podcasting to become popular than I thought it would. It wasn't until Serial came out that podcasting really started to take off, and we started to see our numbers go up. The problem was we were the only ones in podcasting in the horse world. So we were teaching the horse world what a podcast was, how to listen, but we were the only ones. Competition would have been great because it would have helped us out back then. And we for 10 years, there was nobody else.
Roll me back to Serial. You lost me there. How
Okay.
does Serial? So when I was a kid, that was what I did every morning, is I read the Serial box.
No, not
I
that
don't
Serial.
know how that.
The Serial podcast. So it was a murdery podcast that came out. What was it? 2015 or 16, 17, somewhere in there. But it was the breakout podcast. It went to 200 million listens, and it really taught people what a podcast was and how to listen to a podcast. And then they would listen to Serial because their friends said to listen to Serial, and then they'd search horse and they'd find us. And that's really the time when podcasting took a turn. And then the second turn up was during COVID, obviously, when everybody became a podcaster. 90% of them are gone now, but they tried.
Guilty. That's kind of when we started to become podcasters.
You're still here, though.
Totally unrelated. Yeah, well, people seem to like what we do, and like you said, we seem to be good interviewers that know nothing about anything. But you're so right about the improv. So I have a background in improv, love improv, and a lot of that is because when you're doing a live show, and I assume recorded shows or anything, you have to give and take, and improv teaches give and take to an extent that it's unbelievable because you're always on the ball. Like you can't say no, and you have to go with it. How does it help you in what you're doing?
It teaches you, I think what improv does, and all the classes we do, we try and get people to the point where they realize this by the end of the session, the improv session, is it teaches you to listen. That's what it teaches you how to do, because if you're not listening, you're not going to respond. And of course, with most improv, you want comedy, right? So if you're not listening, your next line is not going to be there, and it's not going to be funny, and it's not going to be entertaining. So that's what it does. It really teaches you to listen. So when you're doing an interview like this, I have what I call the golden nuggets that I say every guest gives you a golden nugget. It's your job to follow it or not follow it. And I always follow it because it's going to lead a place that's a treasure that I didn't plan on.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and it's funny you say that, Glenn, because we've had interviews where, you have someone like yourself that's really outspoken, has trained. Like you've got a little theater in you, you got a little flair, a little pizzazz. And then you'll have someone that comes on here and that, they might be like, say, a medical professional, highly educated in that specific topic and field, and you're pulling for nuggets. And as an interviewer, it's your goal to do that. It's your job to do that. And we've had, some of our profiteers out there, and some of our, our interviews and some of the feedback that we get is, like, where were you on that one? Like, pick it up, boys. Like, what's going on? You dropped the ball there, right? But you learn from that. And again, going back to that improv aspect, you're always learning. You're always figuring out the next way of doing it, trying to find a new pattern, a new tempo, a rhythm. What are you getting response from, right? Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, thanks for the comment there. But it's so true. And so I was never big in stage. I never did a lot of acting, but I ended up on a national TV show here in Canada in the horse world, right? Out of nowhere. I had nothing to do with it. But I saw behind the veil. I kind of saw behind, the Wizard of Oz type kind of thing, what behind the curtain looks like. And that's where when James came to me about hosting a podcast, initially I'm like, I have no want to do this. And then I'm like, I think we can. I think we could actually put something together here. But when you started off, you're years before podcasting is the household name that it is now. So
you had to download it to your computer and then transfer it to your iPod because there was no smartphones back
right.
then, right?
So now, okay, so you start off, you go through all this tech hell. That's literal tech hell.
Yeah, it was back then. There wasn't all the stuff we have now.
Right.
No.
So you go through literal tech, and you're teaching your consumer. And you're teaching your consumer to go through it. So what does that process look like? You must have just went down in the basement and banged your head against the wall at night.
Yeah, there were a lot of, plus I had to learn how to edit and do all that stuff too, and with rudimentary tools in the early days, so we were using the basic stuff. I was using a $10 microphone, literally a $10 microphone. By the way, I bought a lot of those microphones and one of the things we did is we went to shows.
The $10 microphone.
Well, we went to shows and events. And that's where we got the word out. We attended a lot of horse shows and a lot of trade shows and events like that. And we would record. I would call up the event and say, "Hey, look," and they didn't know what a podcast was either back then. The horse show didn't know. So we would say, "Hey, we'll do a live show there. We'll record a show there." I went to the trade show, Wholesalers Meet Retailers in the horse world. I went to those. We've been to 38 of those now. So we'll go record with vendors and about new products coming out and things like that, which is where I found all my sponsors. So we went to where our listeners were and taught them how to listen. Really, that's what we did in the early days. It was tough. There was a time, probably, your show about finances. So I went full time 4 years in. I had another job. I was consulting. I was doing that kind of thing in the retail world. And I went full-time about 4 years in, and we had a tough time when I went full-time. It was tough. We needed an investor at one point. One of my co-hosts invested at that point. And actually, she invested and put in, and I gave her 10% of what we'd eventually sell the company for. And she was dumb enough to take it, and then she eventually got paid off really well and was really happy. But, I thought she was dumb at the time. I thought I wouldn't have done that deal. But she believed in it. She believed in me. She believed in the company. She believed in what we were doing. She was a host for 10 years with me. And she got paid off handsomely at the end. So, but, that was take a chance for her, right? She didn't have to do that. But she saved our company, about 5 years in. Because it isn't always rosy, especially when you're in a business that relies on sponsorships and advertising. It's a fickle business.
So obviously in that position, you decided to go to the trade shows, and I did that trade show, right? So at one point, Ahern Saddlery, that was a tack business. Yeah. My father and myself had started here in Canada. I would do Halifax, Montreal, Toronto, Calgary, Vancouver. I would do it twice a year. That was my run. We had tack, we had cowboy hats, boots, jeans, all the apparel that went along with it. And at one point, it was the Canadian Equestrian Equipment and Apparel Association of Canada.
Mm-hmm. I don't think they're around anymore.
It's not. They canned it. Yeah. Well, the internet killed it, right?
Yeah.
But at one point, I was the marketing chair for that when I was like 23 years old. What did I know about marketing for an acronym that long, right? But when you would go to those trade shows, there would be, in Canada, you got to remember, you got to consider us, your 51st state. But we would have 800 or 900 people show up for a tack shop retail or a wholesale show, and you might do $60,000-$70,000 in sales in a day. It's not a bad deal. We'd go down to the Oklahoma to the the World Show in Oklahoma, and they would do that in an hour.
Mm-hmm.
And as Canadians, we were just getting blown out of the water. So as the technology advances, you folks in America, you get first crack at it because you're just so much bigger. You have the cap, you have the flow. And that's where, we saw in the market in Canada, we saw Warren Buffett when he bought into Justin Boots and he took on the apparel side of that. And Warren Buffett he's one of the largest financiers in the world, Berkshire Hathaway. Like this is the mucky muck of the muck. And it crushed the Canadian market. And that was right at the dawn of the online sales aspect. So Justin comes in, sends one rep. They do all of Canada. They do it online. Here, look at our beautiful online catalog. You can www and we're going to put it into your showroom. We'll have it shipped directly to you. Whereas Little Ahern Saddlery, we're trying to hit every trade show all across the country, trying to get into your store. And here's my catalog. Give me a call. It was like trying to throw rocks at the moon. You're playing with Elon. It's not the same game.
And, I think that happens, though. That's cyclical, right? And it's still
100%.
happening today. Things change. And I've been in retail a long time, too. So, and it's always cyclical. We were one of the first tax shops online, and they hated us. Manufacturers hated us, other retailers hated us because we were taking their business. They weren't willing to do their own store. They weren't, they didn't want to do that. They wanted to keep sending out catalogs. We kind of forced the issue there because we were doing business. And then I started a thing called, which I still get, I still have customers talk to me today about how much money they spent on this. But I started something called Tack of the Day, where we sold one product a day at a discount. I was buying all the closeouts from all the manufacturers, and we'd sell 400 or 500 items in a day.
Yeah.
And in our world, that's a lot, right? So, so I did things to disrupt the market, and that's what happened there. But their market's always being disrupted. Yeah. It's always changing. It's changing in podcasting now, right? Everything's changing, but we just have to figure out how to keep up with it. We have to figure out how to change with it and make it work. Otherwise, I don't care what business you're in, you're not going to be around. And we've got to always do that. And you know what? The older we get, the harder that is to do, to be honest.
Well, so that's a question I got for you, Glenn. When you see someone like yourself that has saw their trajectory, right? You've got years in this business now. You saw the innovation. Let's call it the dawning of podcasting.
It was, yeah.
And when we were at PodFest, you were celebrated in that note. Like they were like, this is one of the founding godfathers. I think you won an award. You were given an award, I believe, when we were down there for that.
There's an award in my name, I think. Yeah.
So like I say, PodFest is this, for those of you who don't know, PodFest is one of the larger organizations in, they do it out of Orlando. They do another one in, they just did one in Korea. Was it Korea?
Yeah.
These guys are
over there. Yeah.
Promoting podcasting. And this guy's one of the OGs. He is one of the original founding fathers, if you will, of podcasting. And we're sort of graced with his presence here tonight. But Glenn, when we look at their trajectory that you've seen the industry go with, what do you think? Like, where do you see it moving now? Where do you see the next iteration coming from?
I would love to see it still coming from the independent podcaster, from not the big name celebrity, but we are seeing the big name celebrities do the shows that are attracting large audiences. I still think there's room for the independent podcaster. However, I think it's almost as hard now to break in, to develop a listenership, to develop a community as it was when I started 16 years ago. I think it might even be harder now because there's more shows. There wasn't 4 million shows when I started either. We were in a much smaller pool. So you could make a wave in the pool, where now you're not making a trickle in the pool. But there are community, and I do think I've always said this, I think a niche podcast has an opportunity to do very well if it's done correctly. So we were lucky to be in a niche where people, Patrick will attest to this, people are addicted to horses and they spend all their money on horses, all of it. They don't do anything else. There's no other hobbies. Horses is it. Yep. They are truly addicted and obsessed with horses. So we have an advantage that way, is in that we're in a niche that people are going to consume anything they can.
It's true.
Yeah. It's so true, right? I mean, but that's been our advantage all along, is we are in that world. They also spend all their money, and so when we have sponsors on and we recommend a product, they go buy the product. We did a survey. We do a survey every 2 years of our listeners, and we just did one, and 80% of our listeners bought a product from a commercial that we did in the last year.
Wow.
25%
from a marketing perspective, like that penetration.
It's unbelievable.
That's off the charts.
Well, and when you take a look at our magazine, our company also owns dozen magazines, and our podcast listeners, only 25% of them bought off a magazine in the last year. So look at the difference there, right? There's two different audiences we also determined through our surveys in owning a bunch of magazine companies and having 40 podcasts. Is podcast listeners tend to be different than magazine readers. Readers are different than the audio people. It's just the same as I haven't read a physical book in 20 years, but I've listened to a ton of Audible books.
Right.
I'm a listener. I'm not a reader. And there's a lot of readers who are not listeners. Now, will we get them eventually in the podcast side? I don't know. Maybe.
Right.
But they are two different audiences, which is why when Equine Network looked at purchasing us, they wanted to purchase us. They owned a dozen magazines, but they were missing this side. They didn't have this side. They didn't have the audio-only people.
Yeah. I want to go back to when you were saying that some stars are like starting to do podcasts.
Yeah.
So at first I was a little leery and a little bit worried, some of the big names coming out and doing a lot of comedians are doing podcasts now, but then I kind of broke it down and went, that's a sign. That's a sign that podcasting is going to become even bigger. Podcasting is going to become the show that everyone watches. It's going to be the new cable network because it's free for the most part. It's based on commercials. It's based on product placements and stuff like that. Is that what you're finding right now?
Yeah, we I'm not sure. Am I finding what? I'm not sure what the question was.
Are you finding that that it's becoming more popular because people are turning away from?
Well, they're teaching people how to listen again. Still we're at 47% of the population listens to a podcast on a regular basis. So we still have half the population that's not. So when they find their favorite comedian is doing a show, they go look at that show. But then they also go, I'm into basket weaving. Let me search basket weaving. I'm into horses. Let me search horses. And then they come find us. So those big names are still teaching people about podcasting. Nobody listens to just one podcast. We all listen. I have 50 on my podcast player, right? And nobody, our average with the survey we just did was 7. They listen to 7 podcasts on a regular basis. Okay. So yes, I love the fact that the Joe Rogans of the world are out there teaching people to find podcasts and then to look for others.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. I think it's fascinating. The eyes are being drawn towards the business that we're in. And as long as you keep on, like you said, you're true to your project, you're not fake, and you're not trying to sell something all the time, people are going to come find you and they're going to watch. And that's kind of what we're trying to do on Soaring Profits. We're building a brand that is reliable, truthful, honest, and you can have a conversation and it doesn't matter what we talk about, which I think people are starting to enjoy. And then we're starting other shows to catch those other people that maybe aren't so into the touchy-feely, as Pat puts, and want some more serious content. Yeah. What I'm interested in is, so you had Horse Radio Network. You had it for a long time. It was getting successful. It's taken off. Obviously, if there is a purchaser looking into you, why sell? It doesn't seem to make sense that at the top you would sell it and then start working for it. What brought you to that decision?
Well, I think it does make sense to sell when you're at the top, by the way. Okay. But I got cancer a couple years ago, and colon cancer, multiple surgeries, the whole thing. It was in 2020. It was during COVID, actually. I had my first surgery. I was the only one on the entire floor of the hospital. Now, when at the times have you seen that? I was the only one because it was during this heavy COVID time. Wow. I could do my nightly walks around the hospital, and it would just be me and the nurses. So it was eerie, actually. But yeah, so I got, and it was a wake up call. I'd been working 100 hours a week for 14 years doing this, and it was, and my wife works with me full time, and she's been the one that really has kept everything going. The unsung hero of this whole thing, because she does as much work as I did, and she hosts probably more shows than me right now. But it just was a wake up call that I gotta. It's time to reap some of the rewards, not have the stress of paying the bills and doing everything that a business owner is responsible for. And also it was time, I'm 60 some years old, just got, over cancer. Hopefully I'll stay over cancer, but
yeah, God bless you. That's awesome.
Yeah. I mean, survivor here, but that can change.
Right.
There's always a 50-50 chance it's back. So, and then I had 3 companies approach me at the same time, and they were all looking, and it was kind of just going back and forth between them, and then Equine Network was the perfect fit. It was just the one that fit the best. So it was, and it was cashing out. Yeah, I mean, part of that was cashing out. And also just, wanting to have a chance at retirement at some point. Because as you know, when you have a business, you sink all your money into it in the early days.
Quite often, like when you have a point of impact like that with cancer, obviously it kind of led you to sell a little bit. And like you said, when you're on top, it's a good time to sell.
Yeah.
I'm not a financial guy. Pat will tell me when it's time to sell Soaring Profits, and I hope we're as successful as you are. But have you noticed any other changes? Maybe changes in shows you want to do, changes in things in your personal life you want to try? Now that you're on the other side, I've survived, I'm successful. Now, are you seeing that you're changing directions?
Well,
different things are more important?
Yeah, one of the things that, I still work for Equine Network. I'm a consultant with them. I had a 3-year contract. And I still host the shows that I host. We host Horses in the Morning, which is our most popular and profitable show. It's 5 days a week. It's one of the longest running daily podcasts in the world. And it's still the most popular one. We're at 3,400 episodes, to give you an idea. So, and I've had the same co-host, by the way, since the beginning, since we started, which is unheard of too.
Yeah.
Something about that we said off the hop, you guys avoid politics. You don't know how she votes. She doesn't know how you vote.
Nope, I have no idea.
That was like a thing. Like you guys made an active choice. And, today, not diving into politics, but we had some news in politics.
Yeah. And we will not talk about it tomorrow.
Right. But that's what I mean. Like that is such an interesting thing for me to grapple with. James knows, oh gosh, we go down that rabbit hole sometimes. He's like, put the hat away, Pat. Take the tinfoil off. But for your viewership, that is such a smart, conscious choice to make.
I think we've gotten 100 emails over the last number of years, especially during the election year when it was it Hillary and Trump? Yeah, it was Hillary and Trump, that first election year. We got so many emails saying, I listened to you to get away from all of that. So we're kind of their safe space. And it's still that way to today. Listeners have no idea how I vote. I have no idea how my co-host votes. And we leave it that way because it's not important for what we talk about. It's just not important. It's not, the economy is important. We talk about that. The price of hay is up, that kind of thing. We'll talk about that stuff, but it's not in terms of who caused it. It's just something we have to deal with, and how do we deal with it? So I think you can talk about politics in a different way, and not alienate people. And that, I know probably half our audience is, Democrat, half's Republican, and I can tell you the lines it goes down, and, which side, and Patrick will understand this, which side of the English and Western riding line it goes down. And exactly what I'm talking about too.
Absolutely.
And which is which, right? So, and we have listeners in both of those sides. Yep. And you know what? I start talking about politics, half of them are gone.
Right.
Yeah, no, it is such a smart concept to stay away. And horse people, again, I'm one of them. They're crazy. They're all crazy. They're
not arguing.
Lunatics.
I'm crazy.
Yeah, they are. They're lunatics. They go out and spend. And I want you to picture this. For you folks that don't know anything about horses, you profiteers out there that have never heard this before, you're going to go out and you're going to buy a horse. Somebody's going to show you and tell you need a horse. Then they're going to say you need a truck and trailer to haul it around the circuit all around the world, and we're going to teach you to ride it. Then you're going to go and you're going to win because you're.
By the way, the truck and trailer are $150,000. So
right,
yeah,
right. Because you can't just have the 2 horses.
Well, you buy a truck today, it's $100,000.
That's it. But then you're going to go for ribbons. Some judge somewhere is going to pin a red ribbon on your pony, and you're going to go, yes.
And you just spent $1,000 at that show to get that ribbon.
Right. Plus the 150 in a truck and a trailer, plus the 40 for the horse, plus 100 in feed and affiliate.
Don't mention the farm. We're just building a new farm too. So
the millions of dollars of gas to get to and from.
Yep.
All the people that
the only way you can make money in horses is you start with money. That's the only way. Yep.
And that's the old adage. The joke is, you want to make $1 million bucks, you better have 2 million.
That's right. Yep. And it's still true, by the way, Patrick. That hasn't changed.
Absolutely.
My dad used to say that all the time. He was in the jumping area. He was one of the ringmaster people, and he said the same thing back then. It was, if you want to make money, you have to have money already, because you're not making
There's
any
probably
money.
5% of the horse world that makes money. I mean, the top of the top, the Olympic level riders.
Sure. My dad knew the owner of Campfella. He was a racehorse, and they made a pile of money. But they made a pile of money after the racing was all done, when the horse went out to stud.
Yep, that's right.
Yeah, that's when they started making money. Are you noticing now, because you're in the horse business? So in Canada, some laws have changed, in Ontario specifically, that our horse business has stalled a little bit. Pat could probably talk more about that racing part of it. But racing used to be linked with our gambling, and the prizes used to be paid for by our Ontario gambling. I'm not doing this well. But
actually, it was the same way with the Olympic riders and stuff, too. It was partly funded by the government, too, and I think that kind of went away to some degree.
Interesting. Okay.
So what's happening now is that, because the prizes have gotten so small, that horses aren't selling for as much, and it just goes back down the line. Is that something that's happening in the States too?
No. The prices of horses are through the roof.
Yeah.
And that's been since COVID too, pretty much. But it hasn't dropped a lot. I mean, they're still through the roof. And I'm talking sport horses, trail horses, any horse. We used to buy a trail horse for $1,000, and now to get a good trail horse, you'll spend $5,000 to $10,000. It's crazy right now. Why it has stayed up, I'm not sure. I thought it would have dropped back in the last year or two, but its prices are still up there.
So for me, again, I'm going to put my little economist hat on, is that the demographic in the United States and Canada that has money right now is the 60 plus demographic.
No, it's true.
So a lot of those people after COVID said, I was 3 years, 4 years locked in my house. I wasn't allowed to see my family. I am taking on a hobby, and I am going to do it.
True.
And in Canada, we've seen our real estate assets, Glenn, to be honest with you, like, our real estate has doubled in the last 8 years.
Oh, yeah, here too. I live in Ocala, Florida, which is horse country.
Yeah.
And it's quadrupled here.
Well, that horse park that you guys have down there.
Yeah.
The equestrian center is like something. It's nuts.
It's $1 billion worth of equestrian center. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so
literally $1 billion.
Literally, and always growing, right? Like, that's a hotel, that's a horse park, that's
15 restaurants, and 20,000 arenas, and it's crazy.
We cannot even think about that on the same level here in Canada. We used to have, so my dad, he used to show like Western Pleasure, halter, reining, that sort of stuff. That's where I got into it. And we used to go to the Toronto show, and he'd go up there,
which is a big show. Yeah,
it was. Yeah, for sure. But we'd go to that show, and we'd have horses that, it was in like April. So we'd have horses that were just hairing out, right? You'd be shaving them down, hairing them out, trying to get them good for show. You guys out of Florida, it's 40 plus degrees down there for the last 2 months. They're all dappled up, looking really sharp. We can't compete in our own backyard. And that's the issue. So a trainer from Florida would come up. He'd put a 15 horse trailer together, ship all his horses up here, and take all of the Canadians. Right? Like, you can't compete. It's a no-win game. But you're running and you're trying to compete with, like, some of the big guys, like the Cleve Wells, these trainers that had been doing it for so long, for so many years. They had so much money. They had people that were coming into them that were just, I want my little girl, I want my wife, I want my whoever to be the best.
And to do that, I'm going to sell you a $250,000 horse.
Go get them.
Yep.
Well, so I grew up training with Bill Rinsema, and he sold An Awesome Mister at the Congress sale for $250,000, and that was in 2001 or 2, and that was unheard of. That was a record at the time, and he just lives 5 miles down the road from us here. And that's who I trained with growing up. Bill Rinsema was a great guy. If anyone, shout out to Bill, if anyone needs a great Western Pleasure and halter guy. But that's where I kind of cut my teeth in the industry. The other side of the family is all standardbreds. Those guys are running for money.
Yeah, and that's an industry that's having a tough time now too, the standardbred racing world.
Well, exactly what James was saying.
And standardbreds, for those that don't know, they're the ones that pull the little cart. They have
Right.
that cart. They do the cart racing. Yeah.
Well, that's what James is saying. So in Ontario here specifically, our lotto and gaming licenses for casinos was tied and grandfathered in because of the jockey, the
To the
horseman
tracks, right? Yeah.
Exactly. So they had a third partnership. They had the owner of the property got a third, the Harness Racing Association got a third, and the province of Ontario got a third. Well, 10 years removed, well, you had a lot of money. You had every other horse was, driven and trained by Jim Smith, owned by 1041685 Ontario Incorporated. No name owners. They were all owned by corporate entities because the races we were running for was, before 8, 9, maybe $1,000 in a purse. And then all of a sudden they're running for 15, 20, 25,000 for the same race. That's insane. And now we've gone the other side of that, where unfortunately they've come in, they said, listen, we don't need we're grandfathered in now. We're 15 years in. We're just going to go. We have casinos in every major town now. It's blown up like crazy. Everywhere.
Yeah, it's kind of the same thing happening here. They all used to be tied to tracks, to racetracks, and even greyhound tracks they used to be tied to.
Oh, right.
And now it's just there are casinos everywhere, and they're not tied to track. You know what? A lot of them that are tied to tracks would like to see the track go away because the horses are a pain, and they're a pain in the ass, and they're expensive, and we have to maintain all of that when we can just do blackjack.
Right. Mm-hmm. And it's so much easier.
It's far cheaper. It's far cheaper. And you know what? I do not personally like casinos. There's a lot about them I hate, but there are people that are a little bit older than me that sit there for hours. They will show up.
Patrick and I could sit at the blackjack table for a little while, I think.
And they stay there all day, and they stay on the same machine, and they just dump pile of money after pile of money. And I would imagine there's not much overhead to that business,
no,
except for power, etc. I'd like to get kind of back to the podcasting world. You have a network. I was just looking. You have like quite a few shows. Pat and I are just kind of starting that kind of network thing. How do you pick a show? Like, do you approach people to pick a show? Do people obviously now that you're a bigger network, people come to you, but how do you decide what is brand, what isn't brand, what you think is going to be great, and what's that look like?
So I take a look at three things. We take a look is it a niche, within the horse world that we are not servicing now, and does it have an audience? That's number one. Yep. Number two is, do I have the right host? That's probably the most important thing. One of the things I preach, you guys heard it, when podcast listeners come for the content, but they stay for the hosts. Nobody's here listening to you right now or watching you right now if they don't like you. Right. They're going to make a determination within the first 10 minutes whether they like the host, and they're either in or out. And I don't care what you talk about. If they like the host, they're going to hang around. So we talk about horses, but we talk about life too. And, and we've heard over and over again, hundreds and thousands of times, that they just like us. One of the biggest complaints that they've had about the morning show with Jamie and I is we have too many guests. They want more of us. Because that's what they're...
That's
good. Yeah, no, but
Yeah.
that's true of any show. They come for the content, stay for the hosts. So, that's what I look for. I look for hosts, and I look for hosts that are dynamic, that are fun, that are good listeners, that are naturally curious. You guys are good hosts because you're naturally curious about everything. You couldn't do this show if you weren't naturally curious about everything.
I agree.
You couldn't do it successfully anyway. I would come across that you were just faking it, right? So that's the second thing. And then the third thing is, can I find sponsorship for it? Because I'm in a business. I need to make money doing every show I do. So most of the shows that we start, we have a sponsor at the start. We find a sponsor that's willing to take a chance on that show. And we start with a sponsor. And now we can go to them and say, hey, look, we sell out so quickly. This is your only chance to get in. So, that's an advantage we have for being around so long. But that wasn't that way in the beginning. I mean, my first sponsor, we had 16 listeners. My first sponsor was 6 months in. We had 16 listeners. I went to her and I sold the dream. She bought the dream and bought me, basically. Because when you're selling, they're also buying you. That's the other thing. Yep. A good salesman, they're not buying your product. They're buying you. They believe in you. They're buying it because you said to buy it. So she did. By the way, she's still our biggest sponsor. 16 years later, she's our largest sponsor and sponsors like 6 different shows. And she says that our listeners have been their biggest, that she can attribute more sales to our listeners than any other advertising she does. And she's a hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of advertising every year.
Wow.
And she gets more calls from our listeners than anything else. So, that's what we take a look at. We take a look at those three things. And you guys have to take a look at that too. Maybe not, can I get sponsors now, but is there a potential for sponsors and where are they going to come from? Is there a market there for sponsors for that? Sometimes your more general shows, I pick on life coaches a lot because I really still don't know what one is. But I've met 100 of them over my lifetime. Okay, maybe James is a life coach. Maybe you could explain it to me. But I don't know where you get a sponsor for being a life coach.
Yeah.
I can't help somebody there when they ask for my help. Now, if you're in the bicycle world, I can tell you where to go find sponsors for your bicycle podcast.
Yep.
But you get the idea. That's the things we look at.
Pat and I have had that exact chat over the Soaring Prophets table when we have our team meetings there. And he's like, Soaring Prophets itself has no niche. So it's hard to find a product that matches with it. Financial fitness has a niche, so it'll be easier to find it. And as we build the shows that we're building, they all are a little bit more niche-y. We love Soaring Prophets, though. It's just one of those shows that we really enjoy. A lot of people out there really enjoy, and it gives us a chance to hang out Thursday night, have some fun with my buddy Pat, and chat to interesting people like yourself. So we're not so interested.
But it brings credibility to you too. See, that's the other reason that people do podcasts is you become the person, right, in that world. I'm the voice of the horse world now. I'm a horse husband. I've never trained a horse in my life, and yet I'm the voice of the horse world. Right. So, yes, if you have a fairly successful show, it brings credibility, which leads to other things. Right. So you may not be making direct money off of Soaring Prophets, and you may never make direct money off of it, but there'll be indirect things that'll happen that happened because of this show.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's, what, Glenn, we've been very fortunate with a lot of the opportunities that we've kind of been, we've worked our ass off for, but have kind of fallen into our lap. Is that we're finding now where people are reaching out to us and that are saying, hey, listen, I see the trajectory you guys are on. So we're having people come to us and talk to us about product placement. We have organizations and groups coming to us about coming and doing interview style marketing campaigns for them. And that's very unique.
I hate to see what kind of companies are coming to you for James to talk about their product.
Well, so James and his James and his wellness group, right? But no, so that this space.
Do they involve little blue pills, by the way?
Glenn, you're terrible. That's terrible. So this space is so new.
By the way, I would take that sponsor if they want to come to me, by the way.
Oh, yeah. I'm not saying no. I'll be the face of it. I don't care.
This space is so new in regards to what marketing looks at it as, because it's just getting traction. To me, it's wild when we say we're going to come in, we're going to do interviews with your individuals in your office, and we're going to put a 12 platform show together. They have no idea. That's so obtuse to them. They're like, "What? We thought you were just going to come in and take some pictures and put it on the website." What do you mean? That's a lot of opportunity lost. Let's tell your story. Let's hear what you guys do. Let's work together on this. And that's where I think Soaring Prophets eventually, my idea, my goal, James, I think we're sort of in agreement on, is we want to get to a marketing side of the podcast world as opposed to just content creation and network. But that, I think you need to get the content creation and network to get to the marketing side, because you need to garner traction
and credibility.
Absolutely.
And, I think, James, getting back to what you asked me earlier, too, branded podcasts for corporations and businesses, they're around. A lot of businesses have not done it well.
Right. No.
It tends to be an infomercial. Nobody wants to listen to an infomercial. There are ones that have done it very well. Southwest has done it very well. Several companies have done branded podcasts very well. We've done some for companies. And I think they're starting to figure it out. And I think that's where you guys are going to, that's where you're going to end up, is kind of in that world, is helping the companies do branded podcasts well. They all want to do it, but they all want it to be in a big infomercial. And they all want the lawyers involved and every department in the company involved. And you can't do that, as you know, to make a successful podcast.
So what would your advice be in that? So how if you were taking on Continental Airlines, because it's not American, if you're taking on whoever, what is the piece of advice that you would give as somebody that's done this for the number of years you have to be authentic? How do you drive authentic when all they want is the lawyers?
We did. I can give you a real life example. So, for a number of years, we did a podcast for one of the major feed companies in the world, and what we did, it was a nutrition podcast, a general nutrition podcast, where we actually highlighted their clients.
Right.
So their clients were the guests, and we talked about their businesses and what they did, and only at the end did we do a plug for what feeds they were doing. The show was about the client, it was about their client, not about the company. At the end, we got in the plug. The plug, you got to get in the plug. It's a branded podcast. But the first 20 minutes were not about that. The last 5 to 10 minutes were about that. Yeah. So you really have to make it about, I believe in making it about the clients, the people that, by the way, all of those clients went and told their friends they were on this big company's podcast. And, we always thought in the beginning days that we had to have big name Olympian riders and the big name riders in the horse world, and they were going to be our ticket, right? They were going to be the ones. I can tell you now that that's not true. We get more traction off of our mid-level riders or backyard horse owners because they tell everybody. Your big riders, we're one of 50 interviews they did that week. They don't care. They're not telling anybody. Whereas that mid-level who's never been on a podcast before is telling everybody. So we get more traction off of that than we ever did. So we basically don't interview Olympians anymore. We've totally changed what interviews we are doing now. And we do 5 to 7 a week. So
that's so interesting, because we are finding the exact same thing. We interview someone who's like in the limelight, has thousands and thousands of followers, and we get very little subscribers from it. But we interview a young girl that no one's heard about, that is super cute. She plays piano, she reads, she's written 3 books, and we get 50 to 100 people subscribe, because you're right. They're the ones that share the world. They're the ones They're the ones that tell, hey, I was on a podcast. You have to check it out. Please check it out.
It was my first one, and everybody's excited to hear her, right?
Right.
Yeah.
When she does her 50th, they've heard it before.
Right.
100%.
Yeah, and that's the same with the businesses that we've done. If we've interviewed businesses that have bigger platforms, they don't share it. They don't take the snips, because we make little shorts, and we pass them out, and they don't pick them up. But the smaller businesses, they really do push it because they want that content and they're excited about it. So getting back to your podcast world, when you were talking about the interviewer, that you have to have a special interview. You mentioned that they have to be able to be adaptable. They have to be able to have good voice. Now, because you don't do a lot of video podcast.
No.
So you don't really need the look, right? Or is that part of it?
There's a reason I do podcast audio.
I wasn't shooting fight.
Yeah, well, that's true.
I know you shot shots at me, but I wasn't shooting back. But is there anything else unique, is what I'm saying, that you don't have to worry about because of a video podcast? We have to worry about, like, our SAD and stuff like that, placements and stuff like that.
Oh, see, one of the reasons we don't do video podcasts is these horse girls are not. They just came in from the barn. They're dirty. They are not doing a video podcast. My morning show co-host Jamie, who, again, we've done 3,400 episodes together. No way in hell she's ever doing a video podcast. She's just not doing it because she just came in from the barn and rode 3 horses. She's not doing it.
Right.
But that's so authentic. That's so authentic. Like that. I can picture, because I did it as a kid growing up. You go out in the morning, and especially, Florida, screw you guys with your weather down there.
It's hot as hell now, I got to tell you.
You'd be brushing horses off. You'd come in, you'd be dustier than anything and dirty and sweaty. And you'd come in and just sit down. Well, what'd you just do? I think that's such a neat thing to grasp, especially in a niche podcast world.
Yeah, I'm a guy. See, I'm a guy, so I don't. What I say about this doesn't matter. You know, I think, and I've talked to Jamie about this. I said, but how you look when you come in from the barn is how they all look.
Yes.
When they come in from the barn.
Perfect.
But for some reason, women don't.
No.
Women still don't want to look that way on the camera.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that was my thing when you started saying about it.
Yeah.
I would identify with that. Like if those are your people, I would. So if I went on to talk about horses, and even if I knew a lot about horses, and I walked on with, well, today I'm wearing a suit. I don't usually. I came from a retirement, but you're not going to listen to me. But if I came in and I was wearing, I just came out off the field. I just worked some horses. I think that you would have more buy-in.
Yeah, there's three guys here talking, James. We can't even speak to this stuff.
Yeah. No, and it's funny. It's funny you say that because there's.
And my audience is 95% female.
100%. I like, and it's such a unique space. Like I look at trainers like Clinton Anderson that was doing the Aussie horse stuff, and he came across as this good-looking guy, but he had a bit of brashness, and he was just sexy enough to be achievable. So he would go and he would do all these shows, and women would clamor over him with his Aussie accent, and everyone loved him, right? But he was just enough of an asshole that it was kind of cool. Like he was.
Are we talking about Pat, or are we talking about some other guy?
No, I'm just saying. But that was his niche, and he's not a bad horseman. He's done some cool things in the industry, but brilliant marketer. Like the way that he has put that brand together, Aussie horsemanship, the brands, the products that he's brought on, like that guy is spot on.
Yeah, and there's been a number of those over the years that have done very well with it. I mean, most horse people know the name Monty Roberts. He was the original horse whisperer, right? He trained the horses for the Queen up till the time she died. And he's like 90 years old. We do his show. It's called the Horsemanship Radio Show, and his daughter hosts it, and he's on it. But he was one of the original, before the Clinton Andersons even came around, it was Monty. And it's been interesting getting to know him and know that world, that super marketing world, right? And it's a whole different world. It's
a movie.
Yeah, he's been in movies, and he taught he helped the Queen with her starter horses, and he would be there, and my co-host is a Monty Roberts certified instructor, and she would be at his house, and the Queen would call, and he'd just pick up, and it was her. Just wanting to talk about her horses. I mean, it's bizarre, right? So it is a different world, but marketing's marketing. No matter what we're marketing, it doesn't, it's the fundamentals of marketing are all the same. We have to touch people. We say right now, if a podcast or if a advertiser comes to us and they want to advertise and they'll say, I want to do a month, we won't do it. You have to do at least 3 to 6 months with us because you have to do 7 touches now. People have to hear it 7 times for it to even start to sink in. 7's the minimum. It used to be 3 though. James will probably remember this. When we started marketing years ago, it was 3 touches was the magic number. You had to touch somebody 3 times. But now because of the clutter, it's probably 7's not even right. It's probably 10 to 15 now.
And it has to be shorter.
Yeah, right.
Your message could be long back in the day. Now it has to be short.
And often.
Yes.
Short and often. And especially the more expensive the product. So when a horse trailer person comes to us, I say to them, you have to advertise with us for years because you have to be in their ear the day they decide they need to buy a new horse trailer, which is once every 10 years.
Right.
So, you can't be in their ear 2 years ago on my show, and they'll have forgotten about you by then. So this has to be a consistent, all the time thing so that when they say I have to buy a horse trailer, oh, that's the one that I just heard on the show, even though they've heard it 500 times on the show. And that's the reason, that's the reason that sponsor that's been with us for 14 years is still with us.
Yeah. And it truly is. The horse industry is truly a brand recognition industry. And a lot of it goes to is that you're dealing with higher net worth individuals. So they might not know the industry, the ins and outs of the industries, but they know where not to make mistakes. They know not to buy the jalopy. They're not buying the no name whatever. They're going to buy a product that's proven, it's time tested. Billy Cook in the Western saddle industry made $1 bajillion, and there's more knockoff Billy Cook saddles in the world than there ever were real Billy Cook.
Tell everybody what they run for, the expensive ones.
So that's the story of where I got into Ahern Saddlery. I had a Billy Cook show saddle that I was up at a show north of us here in Ontario, and I had a horse roll over and broke the horn off it. And that saddle at the time, it was my father's. He had it 8 or 9, 10 years, kind of like that. And I think he had paid $4,000 or $5,000 in the 90s.
Yeah, they're tens of thousands of dollars.
That's it. And now
saddle.
Some of the Silversmith show saddles that are out there now, you are literally a small home in most communities. And then you're putting it on the back of no nag, right? They're $100,000+ $200,000 horse you're putting them on. This is not, hey, we're going to take a shot on X brand. These people are very brand specific. They're very brand hungry, and they recognize what everyone else is wearing.
And when you buy something, and especially the horse world, those people that you're talking about, right? When they buy something, they usually buy it because a friend of theirs that they trust recommended it.
Absolutely.
That's the reason advertising on podcasts work. That's the reason that 80% of our audience bought stuff we recommended, because we're their best friends. Jamie and I, especially Jamie and I, because we do a daily show. We're in their ears every day. So we're their best friends. And we hear that all the time. Every meetup we do, I feel like you're my best friend, and I don't know them, right? We don't know them, but they know us. And it's scary sometimes. We'll forget what we talked about. And when we do meetups, they'll mention something, and we'll look at each other and go, did we really talk about that on the air? Because we don't know. We forget they even knew that. But because I'm recommending it, they'll buy it. You can't say that about any other form of advertising. That you have that intimate, very personal relationship that you do with a podcast host that you love.
That's cool.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like Oprah kind of started it.
Well, it's Oprah for sure.
But
she was
Oprah
the original. Yeah.
Was the biggest. She sold every show.
And before her, Paul Harvey on the radio.
Right.
Yes, right. And she made careers. Like, without Oprah, there's no Dr. Phil, there's no Dr. Oz, there's so many people became something just because she said, read this book or talk to this person. And it's incredible. But you're right. Like, so in your case, every morning, the people that you talk to have already been up for several hours, and you're their first morning break. They want to just sit, relax, sip on their coffee and listen to you. So I could see that being a friend, and I could see them with the other people around listening to you, creating conversation.
Yeah, a lot of times they're playing in the barn. It's playing in the barn. Yeah. So I can't tell you how many kids have said, "Oh, Mom makes me listen to that." And then I have to feel sorry for the poor kid who has to listen to us. But
yeah, but they're learning. They're learning the future business, because they're the kids that are there, right? It becomes a family event. But I think that it's the same with podcasting. We have a few people that reach out to our DMs and talk to us like we're family members, or we're close friends, and ask us questions. And then you answer them and you talk to them. Have you had moments when you're like, oh, this isn't a good relationship? This is more like, it's not what you're thinking it of as, oh, this is a nice little chat, everything's good, but they're thinking of it as something more.
I don't think we've had that. No. And we have a large Patreon community, it's not large compared to some, but we have 600 now in our Patreon community, and they all have their own Facebook. They have their own Facebook group, and where it's just them, and it's the most active Facebook group I've seen. There's 26 subgroups off of that they've created about health and wellness, dogs, cooking, knitting. It's all, we call them auditors because that's just kind of a horse term, but they're all auditors, and they're active. And the money's nice every month too that it comes into the company. That's great, but it's more about the community, and we're in there interacting with them all the time. So we've gotten to know a lot of our auditors now over the last 8 years. So they've become our best friends now, are our listeners. We have meetups here once a month for dinner in Ocala for any horse person that wants to come join us, and it's mostly listeners. And they've become our best friends now, our listeners or hosts, fellow hosts. They're our best friends now as our listeners. We joke that when we moved into this house, we had to paint every surface in this house. It needed painted. And we had like 4 or 5 listeners come over and help us paint for an entire day. We got the whole inside of the house done thanks to 2 of them were in for California on vacation. They came over for a whole day to help us paint. We moved furniture the one day, and a bunch of listeners came up for Orlando and helped us move furniture one day. Our listeners really have become our best friends, and so I think it's just the opposite, James. It's become it's become the opposite of that. And I think too they realize, because of the nature of our show, that we're really human. All our faults are out there. So there's not overcoming that we're just like them, Jamie especially. She's that girl all the time.
Yeah.
So it, I think there's less of a barrier there.
Right.
I love that. Glenn, we're running about that hour now, pal. I want to thank you, first of all, so much for taking the time.
It's been fun.
Absolutely. Always is. And it was a pleasure getting to know you down in Orlando. I love being able to talk and kind of reminisce a little bit, because this was a big part of my life with my father, who passed away a little over 2 years ago now. And anytime I get the opportunity to have these kind of conversations, it really takes me back to moments driving in the truck, going haying in the summer, and all the stuff that goes along with it that I hated at the time.
Yep.
But you
cleaning stalls.
But riding shotgun was a whole lot of fun, and we went on a lot of journeys together. So,
and let's face it, Patrick, I picked on James earlier, so it's your turn. Let's face it, there are pretty girls in the horse world.
There's some pretty girls.
There are some picking on.
I married one of them, so
That's not picking on him at all.
Yeah,
I'm sure he did just fine.
He's blushing though.
Yeah.
I'm sure he had no problems in the horse world. Look at him. You get lost in his eyes.
Let me tell you, if there's a teenage boy listening now, you get into the horse world, because the odds are 95-1.
I was very young when I got into the horse industry, and there was part of that as an end goal. So that was, I can totally attest to it. But
you go to a boarding stable and it's all women and one boy,
And I imagine a lot of the women would have a lot of money if they have horses.
Yeah.
Well,
and lots of crazy.
It's not, and you know what? They look pretty good in breeches too. That's, I'm not being sexist. That's just true. Again, I married one. So and she looks good in breeches.
I'm a Western guy, and we have always pushed, right? There's nothing better than a nice pair of blue jeans, right?
Yep, that's right.
Then those English girls kind of walk in. It's like, that's
okay. That's better than blue jeans.
Second best. Yeah, second best.
Yeah, and then Lululemon came and made it everybody.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, because equestrian fashion, that they call equestrian fashion, which isn't really, but it's popular. It's the thing now.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Glenn, I want to thank you, pal. It was an absolute pleasure.
It's fun.
Would love to do this again with you sometime. Yeah. Our listeners love having people like yourself that are doing really cool and amazing things. And that's what we aim to do. I love your story. I love what you've done. And I love the fact that, even though you went through your hard time with COVID, God bless you. You're doing better and you're on the other side of it. And I wish you nothing but the best, pal.
Thank you. And you guys too. You keep it up. Remember, consistency.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I want to thank you. Like, I have learned a lot about advertising, picking podcasts, picking hosts. You are a wealth of knowledge on all sides, not just horses, not just audio podcasts, because all of that transfers. And I hope that our listeners out there, because some of them are podcasters, are hearing what you say, because a lot of the stuff that you're saying is very true. And it sounds like a big component of that is doing your research and knowing your audience. And you have brought that to a whole other level that I think that Pat and I should investigate. Like, you're reaching in and you're touching all of them through this Facebook group. You're getting to know them while they're paying.
When you start your podcast, you should have a private Facebook group. immediately.
Yeah.
Now, if Facebook is your place, horse people are on Facebook, right? But you should have a private group where they can go to talk. Scott Johnson with What Was That Like did that very well. When he started, when we started his years ago, I said, you got to start a private group with your show because it's kind of a unique show. And he did, and now he's thousands of people in there. And it's been 4 years with his show. So, but it gives them a place. They go in and talk about every episode he does. And that's kind of what happens with ours, but they also talk about their lives and show pictures of their horses. I got to leave you with one thing, and this is a problem if we have podcasters listening. It's a problem in the podcast world. It's always been, and that's the dropout rate is very high. The average podcaster does 7 episodes and quits. There are going to be, even if you get to the point where I am, right? There are hard times. You know, every business has hard times. I learned this from the hiking community. I helped him start the hiking radio network, and the hiking community, the long distance hiking community, their saying is don't quit on a bad day. Right. So it's pouring down rain. You've been hiking for 12 hours. You're soaked. You're miserable. It's awful. You want to quit. Never quit on a bad day. Always quit on a sunny day. If you're going to quit, quit on a sunny day because you're quitting then for the right reason. So there's going to be hard times, but guess what? You're going to wake up tomorrow and it's not as hard. And you're going to be through that hard time, and then all of a sudden there's going to be a good time. And this is true of anything in life, right? It's true of anything you do. Yes, there are times when you should quit, but you're going to wait until the sunny day, till the happy day, and go, okay, I really should quit this. Not when you're miserable and it's awful. It's true of marriages. It's true of everything, right? Everything in life. Don't quit on a bad day.
I think that's brilliant and a great way to end this show. Thanks so much for coming on, Glenn. You're amazing.
You're welcome. It's been fun.